The Atomic Pi was released in 2019 as a competitor to the Raspberry Pi 3 B+, although originally it was never actually built to be a consumer SBC. Instead, it was designed to be used as the main control board for the Curie robot by Mayfield Robotics. When they folded in 2018, they auctioned off their stock. Digital loggers purchased the SBCs and sold them as the Atomic Pi. Never heard of the Curie robot? Well, think of Robbie the Robot Jr. with Alexa built in. Now, the Atomic Pi only came in one configuration. It had an x86 quad-core Intel Atom at 1.92 GHz with 2 gigs of RAM, 16 gigs of onboard storage, and an SD slot that I've read can handle up to a 256 gigabyte SD card. There was one USB 3 port. However, the camera connector could also be used as a USB 2 port if you weren't using the camera. Gigabit Ethernet, dual-band Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth 4.0 were also built in. Shortly after the Atomic Pi was released, the Raspberry Pi 4 was released. The Raspberry Pi 4 that we'll be comparing it against has an ARM quad-core Cortex A72 at 1.8 GHz. The board in this video has 2 gigs of RAM to match the Atomic Pi, an SD card slot that again I've read can handle up to a 2 terabyte card. It has 2 USB 2.0 ports, 2 USB 3.0 ports, Gigabit Ethernet, dual-band Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth 5 is also built in. When we look at these specs side to side, they may look fairly similar. However, the Raspberry Pi put all of this into a much smaller package, and it used less power. So let's see how their performance compares. First, I tested with Sysbench using a single thread for a total time of 60 seconds. The Raspberry Pi absolutely destroyed the Atomic Pi by having over 35,000 total events and an average of over 586 events per second. The multi-threaded benchmark was the same story, with the Raspberry Pi scoring nearly 141,000 events with an average of 2,348 per second. Next up, 7-zip. Now this is the Linux GUI version, and it's not perfect, but the files all came out, fine regardless. The Atomic Pi won this round by finishing nearly a minute and a half sooner. Handbrake goes back to the Raspberry Pi. Both did pretty well, but the Raspberry Pi pulled ahead, finishing 14 minutes sooner and having on average nearly a 2 FPS lead. With the YouTube test, as usual, each of these videos are played from YouTube using a browser with all hardware acceleration disabled. Each of these boards has their own video acceleration, but I'm going after raw CPU power here. Neither were too thrilled at this, but you can see that the Raspberry Pi is much smoother than the Atomic. Also, due to dropped frames, the browser for the Atomic Pi kept dropping the resolution while the Raspberry Pi stayed at 1080 the entire time. Now for just a quick 3D test, I used webglsamples. I'll place a link in the description. Now for this to work, obviously hardware acceleration had to be re-enabled, and it looks like the Atomic Pi is going to win this round, as the average frame rate is often far higher and sometimes about double that of the Raspberry Pi. So that was just a quick benchmark of these two. When dealing with different CPU architectures, it's difficult to find, software that will run natively on each. Now, personally, my vote goes to the Raspberry Pi. It's smaller and uses less power. I've used the Atomic Pi in a couple projects, and although it worked, it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. Now, some may say, but the Atomic Pi can run Windows 10, and well, yes, it can. But running a non-stripped-down version of Windows 10 with 2 gigs of RAM, well, that's a nightmare. Also, the Raspberry Pi, there's an ARM version of Windows as well. And unless you have a 8 gig Raspberry Pi, it's pretty bad. Also, good luck finding software to run on it. Now, if I was building something that needed a small PC with Windows, I'd probably find a used NUC or even a small laptop, and could pick one up online with a busted screen pretty cheap. But either way, I'm still waiting for some equipment to come in, and that'll be in the videos in the future as soon as they come in and as soon as I have a chance to benchmark them and get all the footage out. So if you're still watching, again, as I always say, thank you, and I'll see you next time.